This is part 2 of our conversation with Philippa Rees. Welcome to SkyBlue Symposia, a convivial gathering for stimulating conversation and a free interchange of ideas. Today, Philippa Rees has been kind enough to join us for a new symposium as we continue consciously exploring. Philippa and listeners, I am so glad you could join us. I am Sibel and I will be your host. Susan and Chipper will be joining us on this roundtable. We invited Philippa today because she has written a truly unique book, Involution, an Odyssey Reconciling Science to God. She balances the artistic right brain and the logical left brain by presenting her work in a combination of poetry cantos and in scientific and historical footnotes. Reading the poetry sections gives you an almost emotional, spiritual body understanding of her message. You'll feel this treat for yourself when she reads us some of her work. Philippa has a multicultural background from South Africa to the U.S. to Europe. She was an academic before her mystical experience. She will be sharing with us some of her journey and how she integrated these diverse experiences.
I have to laugh because it's like, I swear you're speaking to me. This move I'm making, it's everything and just going, but it's only the 4th or 5th time I've done it, so one just has to do.
Well, it's pretty traumatic. I mean, it's never easy, is it?
It's never easy, but that certainty that you spoke of rings so true. It's like that's it. There's no doubt, there's no question. You might not even be able to explain it logically or rationally, but it's just,
Well, I think one of the things that I've really had to face through my 4 daughters too is that I think that the unitary marital world, which was the stability of humankind, is breaking down. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's a very different world, and the old morality is being replaced, hopefully, by a better one. But I do think we're all beginning to realize that our lives consist of many relationships, and we grow through them all. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't be loyal to those one has, but I think that our growth, each of us has got to grow ourselves. And if the relationship stagnates or limits, then maybe we have to do the hardest thing of all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, we have to go where soul takes us, and that's all that matters in the end. And we meet people along the way that we appreciate the time that we're with them, and everybody grows as a result. So,
well, that's true. I mean, when we didn't dwell on it for very long, but when I first came to England and had nothing, I found that everything was provided. Suddenly I'd be asked, these wonderful people who looked after me had a caravan. They were very modest. They had no money, but they said, come and stay with us until you need, and they were just the right people because they were interested in the world I was living in and tolerant of it. And it was quite remarkable how almost everything, if I trusted, was provided the minute I needed it.
Oh, you can ask the rest of the group here. That's all I say is just trust, just trust, just trust. And it's so true. And there is something about trusting that what we really need will be given to us. We don't have to fight for it. We don't have to beg for it. This is about love. And it's a loving relationship. Why wouldn't love want to give us love and what we need, what we truly need? I'm not talking about what we want or we think we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a problem with this because I'm finding trying to sell this book, about by that I mean sell the idea of it, really very difficult indeed. I'm not at all evangelical. I don't find it comes easily at all. I'm not a social networker of any kind, and this is the one bit that has been the most uphill for me, really.
Well, I can appreciate very much what you're saying, but that also seems to me part of the challenge that we're put forward. And also, I'm a firm believer through my experience that we put it out there, but we have to wait for the timing to gestate for it to catch on.
Absolutely.
And then it will flow, but we have to put it out there.
Well, what David was saying was that the time is changing, and the response to this book now is very different from. And the other thing, from another aspect I didn't deal with when you asked about why did I write it poetically. I wrote it poetically because it would have been utterly unmanageable otherwise. But more importantly, I wrote it for every man. I didn't write it addressed to science because they're the least likely to jump for it. And I think that the given opinions that imagine that the control of what people want to read is also got to go. And I never imagined this book is going to be a mass read at all, but it's quite clear from the reviews that are already up on Amazon that it's having an effect on those few who have got it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those that are at the front of the tsunami that's coming, those who are the first little ripples of the tsunami, will get it and drink it in, Philippa.
Well, I hope so. I mean, one of the things that has been suggested, and I think I must try and find the energy to do it, is that I should just do the poetry as an audio book, just simply read it as an audio and put in some natural sound, because I think, lots of people sit in cars and spend time in things that, and from the reviews, it appears that a lot of people aren't bothering with the sounds at all. They're just reading the poetry.
Yeah,
I think that would be such a good idea, Philippa. That is such an immediate way to communicate the frequency on which it was written.
Yes, I was just thinking that through your voice, the actual sound waves make such a difference to consciousness, and through those sound waves, you also project your soul and your heart, and it definitely comes through.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, because just listening to the readings, the word that came to my mind was Shakespearean, and how you read. So you've got this resonant quality to your reading and this richness to it, and then it's true. We've been doing this a while, and I do interviews all the time in my work, and I can hear in people's voices, in a way, the tone of their spirit, and your tone of who you are comes through. And I'm really delighted we're doing this interview to let people see who you are, because I think it does come through so well in your voice.
Well, thank you. I quite agree with you. I think one learns more about everybody through their voice than anything else. Mm-hmm. I mean, voices are the most direct access to, well, I suppose you'd call it the soul, the spirit of who you're talking to. I quite agree with that.
Yeah.
It's like you were talking about earlier with the DNA being encoded by mind. It's the physical representation of the quality of consciousness.
Absolutely, David, yeah. And when we get to the final canto, it's actually about the basis of mathematical modeling. You talked about Fibonacci. and the golden mean. But if you look at the structure of DNA, they're all there. And when you look at the famous Da Vinci Vitruvian Man, the square and the circle and the proportions of the human body, if you actually look at the structure of DNA, you'll find all the mathematics, the circles, the conical sections, the pyramids, everything is built into the physical structure of DNA. And what I propose, it's still to be shown, but I propose, I'm fairly sure it will be, is that the inspiration of great mathematics is reading directly the structure of DNA.
Because that was like really interesting. So,
Philippa, this is Chipper. Would you please read a section of your poetry? There's such a richness when poetry is read by the author.
With pleasure. I propose to read the Afterword, in which soul asks reason to explain herself. And this is really about my experiences that underpin the entire book. Why so tardy were you summoned to express the wax conviction that has cradled you through life? How can it bring more ridicule to carve the slab of science with a poet's pen than to pretend deduction or the logic net, knotted piecemeal from ad hoc experiment? When I have heard a music stripped of word, consumed a knowledge boned of mind, worn fabric smooth with neither warp nor weft, a stomacher of synthesis, laced through with gold alternatives to argument, that eye you opened on that beach and never closed completely, though I attempted to forget the obligations it imposed. Conviction? Sense? You are unwise. When Schopenhauer, Hegel, many came before with better minds than yours, and as ignored. The perennial philosophy never wanted advocates. Why yours? You mentioned obligation. What did it garner in to drive your life to this last moment's pause? Why so uncertain of your suit, when you already know the thickets of rebuke? What will you add to that broad highway of precarious thought? Why else did you bequeath me solitude from birth, but to prepare my ear to hear a different music? At each turn the way moved further from collective certainties towards the single moment when that eye removed all doubt of what I should and was. Why birth me like a small papoose among the larvae in their single cots, the only white skin nestled among black? Why take my father from me ere I weaned, or set my sandaled feet towards a school so I could shape a language to reject? All down the corridors of years behind, I was instructed carefully, each discipline a stone to set, to counter with, or craft, a glove to fit the hand that measured it. When stripped away, it peeled my skin, printed with a mirror inside out. It is not thought that brings me to this point, but perhaps a hope that science has run dry. Its hypotheses are vacant, and its dearth betrays the limits of its intellect. Because I know, I must believe that old words now might meet new timpani. Make method now your master, enough of this slow measure. Strip out persuasion and apology. There will be those who choose to understand, for they already are. For the others, who will read debatingly to evaluate the wellsprings of your views, a tongue dissolves the sherbet of this fresh new taste upon a palate furred with doubt. I suggest you introduce yourself with politesse. Why should you expect an audience rapt when they are new to this? Well, that eye, that lucid green-gold lens appeared quite uninvited. I cannot account for how it found me waiting on a beach, sideways seated with a man. It came to me much later that the eye was both a hinge and trapdoor. The first pinched out my life before, the second sealed return. But on the occasion it appeared, the dawn's sweet sweep of sea, the hiss of surf, the soft raiment of caressing wind, was fitting bed to focus that all-seeing lens. Before its birth, it drew aside the curtain of the real by an incision in the landscape, shattered spikes of surface glass, slid on lasers sideways, and completely disappeared. It was as though the waxwing had been stunned, and as it fell, it pulled the painted cheesecloth down. The landscape was no more. Gone were 4 dimensions, with all newly dissolved walls. The luminescence was more atmosphere than light, more clarity transparent, a boundless nothing of the all, pregnant with potential birth, yet already born, leaving the loom unoccupied by either thread or time, into which that all-seeing eye swelled slowly into sight, to gaze behind and forward, clear, compassionate. Steady and unblinking it remained, while we perused its green-gold iris, ringed and flecked, nor quivered while we spoke. From either side of nothing remained impervious. The only thing that was, that eye, all visual else dissolved, though words exchanged from his mind to mine were spoken through the air, until confirmed identical, it slowly disappeared. From the periphery, the wings of stage, the landscape now returned. The spicules of the curtain rent, moved back to reconnect. A face with stricken, swimming eyes, a freshly purling sky. Plato's surface of that peerless cave of false, persuasive sense.
Exquisite. That's just so beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that.
It's just touched me so deeply.
Well, bless you.
You are a living mystic, you know, Philippa.
Yes, I have been cursed with that, I have to say.
A happy curse some of us bear. Would you describe the journey of reason and soul? Does the story... Yes, just a brief synopsis to give us an idea. And does the story reflect a journey from that original union to separation to reunion?
Absolutely, it does. The decision to write it as a Socratic dialogue is to represent the twinned helix of DNA. Reason takes the thread of science, soul takes the thread of art, and both are therefore different languages to carry that kundalini, if you like, the rosary of genius. So they begin in pre-Socratic Greece with the great unified field theories of Heraclitus, flux and enantiodromia. Heraclitus talked about the tendency of everything to become its opposite. Parmenides, the most crucial moment, the road less traveled towards the goddess, and Parmenides describes his journey to the goddess, who offers a journey to the underworld, where confronting death is the way in which you realize that life is actually everlasting, and you are in fact immortal. The soul is immortal. And Parmenides' entire poem is both incantatory, so it takes you there, but it also describes the journey. And Parmenides was very distorted, according to a famous guy called Peter Kingsley, who now says Plato distorted Parmenides because Parmenides understood completely the unity of sound as a means of conveying the soul to the Godhead through the goddess. The feminine, the divine feminine would take the soul to its origins with the great oversoul. And according to Kingsley, Plato distorted Parmenides because he was rather jealous of him. And then we go on to Empedocles, which dealt with the first structure of matter, the 4 elements of matter. So immediately we're now beginning to start to see the difference between Parmenides, who talks about the entirety, and Empedocles, who talks about matter. And the conflict in Empedocles is between love and strife. And yes, according to Empedocles, strife was necessary so that love would be seen to be human love, and love on earth would never be more than a shadow of the divine love. And Empedocles also claimed that he was essentially a god, brought to man to convey this information. So those pre-Socratic Greeks, who were totally brilliant in the Aegean, prior to Plato and Aristotle, is where the story begins. Then we deal with Plato and Aristotle, and the divorce between Aristotle's concentration on change and decay and the world that science will be looking at, and Plato's immortal soul and the unchangeability of it, and the dichotomy that these two then introduced to the church that followed them, and the fact that Aristotle was used by certain sections, Plato by others, and the division between the rational Aristotelian and the intuitive Platonic then found its way through all the divisions and right up until virtually now, I suppose. And we're now getting to the last of those two great divisions, which is the necessity to recombine quantum theory and relativity, which are the last two great divisions that we're left with. So yes, you're quite right. The story is the narration of the Odyssey from unity through diversity until now we reapproach the unity.
And do you feel that we had to go to the extreme of the rational, the left brain, so to speak, the masculine in a way, in order to cause this reunion, to bring it back into harmony again?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, it's easy after the event to say, well, we had to, but the consequence of having done so is we've nearly destroyed the globe, which was entrusted to us. We better suddenly start realizing that we have to reunite with the feminine within us and the caring, nurturing, and recognize that we're immersed in the totality of consciousness. We can't escape it, nor can we dictate to it. And until we actually realize that, we are in severe jeopardy. And that's another reason why I wrote the book, because I felt anything that could contribute to realigning science in any way at all had to be attempted. But the consequence of reason and soul having divorced so totally has now forced us, I think, to reconcile the necessity of getting them together.
Yes. And you wrote, women are, at the end as at the beginning, the means of life and the idols of romantic aspiration, the practitioners of death in every birth. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, if you look at the history of the divine feminine, I don't know if any of you come across a recent book that's been published on a phenomenal book by Anne Baring on the divine feminine and the loss of the divine feminine. But if you look at the history of the earliest portrayals of women, where the goddess figures usually very sort of bulbous and pregnant, and then the Artemis, the early Greek Artemis, and Ceres and so forth. The divine feminine in the early stages of man's life were celebrated, Athena and so forth, and Persephone and the underworld and what have you. And then the forms of perfection, if you consider it, the idealized gift of the troubadours was to worship women, but without the hope of attaining them. It was the very romance of the unattainability of the feminine that drove the medieval troubadours, and this was then embodied in the Marian figure in the church, which everybody now, of course, claims that Mary became rather synthetic and rather sort of weakened from the real importance of the bride of Christ. Not that she was, but the church became the bride. So the feminine image has always driven the best in man. So we were dealing with, whether it's Dante for Beatrice, or Faust, or Petrarch, or Boccaccio, or Abelard and Eloise, the poetry of Shakespeare, John Donne, the symbolism of the Christian church, all these things relate to the divine feminine, although the monotheistic religions like Judaism and Islam have hugely suppressed the divine feminine, hardly acknowledged that she exists at all. But what interests me is that looking at the inspirations of genius it's always perfection that they seek. That's why poor Kepler was horrified when he realized that the planets transcribed elliptical circles, because that wasn't a perfect form. He was greatly heartened when he realized that actually it was even more perfect than a circle, because the speed changed according to where it was, so it was a dynamic perfection rather than a static one. Aristotle's perfect Empyrean worlds too, and the Platonic solids, everything in a way stems from the divine feminine idealism that started at the origins of religious instinct. And what is very interesting is why no matter how materialistic science got, there has always seemed to be a belief in the perfection of creation. Now, what does perfection lie in except the religious instinct? And in what lies that religious instinct except the recognition of something knowledgeable to the soul within? So if you really recognize that, if you believe in reincarnation, I don't know whether you do, but if you do, of course, we've all been feminine. So femininity isn't restricted to women only, and men are increasingly at ease with their own feminine side, and women with their masculine side. I mean, one thing I haven't bothered to tell you about is when I'm not writing poetry and being a mystic, I'm a builder. So, so just to some extent, and I have to say that there's a parallel here, because my building is all out of skips and reclamation and what I can do with what I find. My whole house has been built out of skips and reclamation. And in a way, this is a theory that has been built out of scientific skips and reclamation. I've just repurposed all the scientific bits and pieces that I could find. But going back to what you said, the moment of birth is always a death for the mother. Yes. Giving birth is always a moment of allowing something to happen that could kill you. And having had 4 children of my own, I assure you that I know that that is the case.
Yes.
And to some extent, I think that's why women have found the path to mysticism so much easier than men, because I think they have been prepared by this experience to give over, to let go, and to just let it happen. And I think this is why women find it easier, because it's more recent for them.
Mm-hmm. And a couple of thoughts came to me as you were speaking, and that is, as an embryo, we all start off as women, but men change into men. That thought occurred to me. Also, what you were saying about there is no separation between matter, mother, and consciousness. And in that birth process, birth becomes death, death becomes life. Even the child goes through a death of the warmth, the comfort, the safety of the womb, and is thrust out into a new life. So it all begins to make sense. And I completely agree with you, Philippa, that women embody this process. And I'm very grateful to be incarnated as a woman this time. It's a lot easier.
Yes, I think it is a lot easier. I think men have a much harder time because I think women almost are prepared for the role that they have to bring other life into the world. So their unselfishness is implicit,
yes,
whereas men is not. And I think this obsession with sex that has overwhelmed Western society now interests me, because I do see this as a product of the stage in evolution we've got to, that to some extent people are fearful of being alone, and this clutching at sexual experience and kicks and so forth is a debasement of the divine feminine in no uncertain terms. But I think it might still also be, as I think massive drug taking is also symptomatic of a clamoring hunger for something bigger, deeper, wider, more expansive. And I think that sex doesn't fulfill it, therefore it becomes obsessive. And I think drugs don't fulfill it because they become obsessive. But nevertheless, I do wonder whether this recognition of where we are collectively at the moment, standing at the brink of something that hasn't yet become spiritual, but looks like the loss of everything else.
Yes. They give us perhaps a glimmer of what we're searching for, although it's not what we're searching for. It's just a brief glimmer of it.
Absolutely.
May I read something to you, Philippa? I
Please do that.
A while back, and I am real bad about marking the dates when I do these things, but what is a mathematical equation of beauty? Is it a framing of a face in swirled, frozen grace, mobilized in moments where love beams from an eye, a gentle tug of caution in the corners of a mouth, an escaped laugh from worry's hurried tasks? Is it the doom reflected in a mirroring as soul? And can it bring relief when waves peaked shake worn habits from complacency's abode? Is it in the currents that flow from itself as twistings, Coriolis forces on the track? If it's taken from the urging scene and clothed in gravity's held dream, and is it only given by what it will not take? In this dusty place we find we face, with nothing in between. Where does fee fit in the pie we spiral in? Is it only Rorschach's take on premeditated sin? Bolstered by the weaponry of fear just loves to wield as it carves its name in stones flung wide, trampled in the dirt, brought into a circle holding harbored fire. And does it burn forever on that summit of desire where eagles soar in smokeless heights inspired? Namaste.
Yes. Pretty intense, David, that.
And beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, are you a mathematician?
No, I'm just a guy that likes Dr. Seuss.
Well, that's a very. I'd like to hear it read a bit slower. It was very impressive. I didn't take in all the references, and I would have liked to have done that.
Well, that's what struck me about your work, is that the references flow very easily to me. You know, I don't have near the educational background that you spoke of, and yet I'm an eclectic reader, and so all of these little avenues that pop up and want followed. What you wrote was very meaningful. Thank you.
Well, bless you. I mean, I'm very interested in your reaction, because when Erwin Laszlo first saw this, when it was in manuscript, he said, send it to my publishers, which are Inner Traditions, and tell them to publish it and tell them I'll endorse it. And they kept it 4 months, and they didn't. They said no. And they then said there is not an American that would read a scientific history in poetic form. You can forget.
Well, unless they put it on TV in segments.
I mean, it's interesting to me, because I don't believe that's true, really. I don't. But one of the things that I was intent on doing, which is why I wrote it, a slightly formal, not totally formal, but slightly formal verse, because I think it's easier to absorb. And if you're writing at the length that I've had to, I wanted to make it as effortless to read as possible.
What you spoke of about the voice, about music being that closest touch that we can make as humans, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but the voice is the original music.
Mm.
And as you know, the whole history of all of the scripture and all of the traditions has been primarily oral, and yet the substitution for it into written form embeds that separation.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the domination of grammar, which, as I call it, the goose step of grammar, is a great tragedy. But I don't know if you know about the recent work of Petrov and.
I've only run across his name, and I couldn't. That's on my list to do.
or Peter Gayayev. I mean, what is really fascinating about this is that Gayayev, I'm not sure how you pronounce him, worked out that actually DNA is directly influenced by sound waves,
Yes.
and that chanting and mantras and so forth directly influence the structure of DNA.
Yes.
And he has done the most incredible work altering DNA by using sound waves. Laser passes through DNA, encodes the DNA in the laser light, and he has irradiated seeds that were destroyed at Chernobyl with this DNA irradiated laser light and corrected, revitalized them. So in other words, altered the DNA.
Right.
And then not only by solitonic waves, but their sound waves are similar to solitonic waves, and they last a great deal longer. They remain longer. And now it's quite clear, and there's this man Petrov, I've just read 3 volumes of his extraordinary book. It's pretty unreadable because it's very badly translated, but nevertheless, he claims to be looking through clairvoyance at DNA directly and able to, as it were, almost speak to it to change cancerous DNA to non-cancerous DNA.
Well, that goes along with Emoto's work with water as well.
Yeah, exactly, and Scharnberger.
Is that the frequency is the effective avenue towards direct manipulation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, there are worrying aspects because it could be so much open to abuse, but I don't.
It'll be self-correcting, I think. I actually do think
that's
that.
What they do claim, that you can't alter what. So if the person you're treating through this measure doesn't want it to happen, even if a little bit of them doesn't want it to happen, it won't happen.
Right.
So that is ultimate free will, surely.
Oh, Philippa, this is Sibel again. So in speaking about science and the soul, so what do you think science has given us when the pendulum has swung so far into science, and what has been the cost of just straight science, the separated science?
Well, I mean, we can't deny that it's given us mastery. Whether we've used it wisely is another matter. It's given us longer lives and our part understanding of a world that's subservient to us. I think, obviously, all the sort of creature comforts we could say science has given us, the technology of science. I'm not sure that I suppose if I was a medieval mind, I would be hugely rejoicing at what science understood. If I was Roger Bacon and understood flight and I understood these things, I would suddenly rejoice that science was quite spectacular. It's more difficult looking at what science has destroyed to continue to feel that in quite that innocent way. But one must be careful not to throw the baby out. So I think that really what science has given us is mastery and technology, competence, power, but not wisdom, not modesty. And more importantly, I think what it has separated us from is the essential nature of ourselves, our deeper selves. And from that point of view, I think your earlier question is, did we have to go that way to get back to where we might be getting back to now? I think we are getting back to it. I think there's a huge movement towards spirituality in every way. So maybe science's reductionism has created the starvation that will seek something deeper, wider. And so maybe science ultimately will be seen to have given us that hunger for having denied it for so long.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah, because it seems like academia has just gotten, finer and finer what's on the point of the pin of a head, or the head of a pin, sorry, instead of the broader picture. And now it's like, yeah, the butterfly does affect everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we could have only got the certainty that we've got to. I mean, I was very interested in this book of Alexander, the neurosurgeon who was dead. You've heard of what
Oh,
hypothesis?
yes. Yeah.
Now, I mean, what is intriguing about that is not his experience, because that's been reported by lots of people in ways, but quite clearly the importance was who he was and what he said and what his conversion entailed. And I suppose that that is a measure of how entrenched science is, that we've got to have a scientist go through the conversion before we listen. But actually, science has failed to listen to all its own geniuses throughout history. And that's another thing that I want involution to achieve, is to reinvigorate science with a respect for its own prophets.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah, there's recently, I don't know if you've heard, Rupert Sheldrake and Graham Hancock had their talks banned off TED Talks, and they're talking about consciousness and the dogmas of science that we need to move past. And by doing that, by having them be banned, many people are listening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I did send involution to Rupert Sheldrake, or asked him. He said, I don't have time to read poetry.
You're working parallel.
Absolutely. I'm afraid that's going to be true of this all round. I mean, the interesting thing is, and to me it's quite a sadness, that the people who I thought would really support this book, people who are crying out for a new scientific paradigm, aren't madly interested, I don't think. Funnily enough, the greatest support has come from the people I would least expect, innocent sort of university students, people who have no preconceived ideas about things, who just take it innocently. Because when I first brought this out in 1970, apart from Koestler and Konrad Lorenz, who were quite wonderful and supported it, but they all said, you haven't a hope, it'll never be published now. And then they said, wait 10 years, and it's taken 40, So they were right, they were out by 30 years, really. I don't have any, to be honest, I don't have any doubt in the value of involution. I know that I'm not sufficiently academically high-powered to gain much personal respect. I just hope the book will do it for itself, really.
Well, actually, I think we're reaching a place where, because of the internet, people are choosing for themselves what they think has value, rather than waiting for a university or professor to tell them what has value.
Yes, quite.
So I think you have actually, this is a perfect time for you. And so my next question was that, paradigm shifts allow for new thought, new questions, new discoveries. What new possibilities do you think may open up, as we add spirit back to science?
Oh, God, I don't think we can begin to assess what will happen when science starts looking at consciousness. We're right at the tail end of science, just about being prepared to accept that consciousness is not the emission of brain. But we're only just there. And when they actually realize that consciousness is DNA and is the web, the interweb, the biocomputer of DNA spread throughout, I mean, in a sense, the World Wide Web is a model of what we are capable of internally. And once science realizes that communication can happen through the recognition of an internal availability of connection through DNA, I don't think there's any limit as to what will be achieved. I mean, these Russians are already talking about immortality, because the cell can live forever. It can be repaired forever. I'm not sure I like the sound of it, but nevertheless, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about cures for every kind of cancer and disease, because you just talk nicely to DNA in Russian and it'll listen to you. So I think that what involution will, if it's accepted, and I don't know how quickly it will be, is the preciousness of individuals. Because DNA is about the extraordinary contributions that each individual can make to the collective whole. And therefore, the orthodoxy, the stamping down of originality, the conformity that is required will have to go, because it is extraordinary individuals who make a difference, not committees. So I think that'll happen. I think the technology will go leaps and bounds. I don't think we've begun to know the power we have once we unleash consciousness creatively. I mean, nullius in verba was the motto of the Royal Society, take no man's word. Now it'll have to be take each man's word. And I think that will make a great difference to what people will be prepared to offer, because they will be valued. And we will start to value individuals for their unique gifts, not only the socially acceptable ones, not only the products of the intellect, but the creative gifts of everybody, and education will have to change. So I don't think we can begin to assess what will happen if involution is really grasped as a concept.
Yeah, that makes me think, I had a friend who had a Down syndrome child, and she was speaking with other friends who had Down syndrome children, and she said what people missed was what a blessing they were, because they had such a pure heart and spirit to them. And so they weren't being recognized for their intellect, but they were recognizing how beautiful they were as human beings, and it wasn't about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, in our stratified world, intellect and being smart and being successful and being competitive is still the order of the day. But that is changing, and I think the transition movement in towns and cities and so forth is going to change that as well, because these transition towns, I'm sure you have them where you are, do you? Where they're establishing communities in which all walks of life have got to be represented. So you will have a plumber in your village, and you will have a shoemaker, and you will have a vegetable gardener. You won't have this stratified urban societies that exist.
Yeah, we're talking, there's more localization happening, where you want the local community to support itself and to be interdependent among itself, versus all, now United States is very Wall Street centered, and people are trying to pull back from being Wall Street centered.
Well, we're very London-centred here for so much the same reason.
Yeah.
And I don't think the politicians have begun to grasp what the grassroots have really grasped very thoroughly already.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Right. Well, that's the last of our questions. I was wondering if you had maybe a final poem you might like to share.
Part of the book?
Yeah, or whatever strikes you.
Let's see what let me have a look. Well, I think if we're going to end with this, I'll read you just the opening to Canto Nine.
Okay.
Canto Nine, Love and Reunion. I am a herald sent to call you to your future home. How may I entice you there, along this thread divide, this fragile coil of argument, through muslin shroud of mind? This soliloquy is my siren song. I must myself unclothe. The reason led you by the hand, I sing but to an ear. I have in reason's solid tread walked in footfall's anchorage, but now Caduceus is bid, as Prospero's new enlivened staff, to conclude this narrative. I would waft aromas sweet, a scented amaryllis, brushed with myrrh, tinged with rose, just beneath your nose. The spice, or sweetness, would persuade your waiting feet to follow. Have you tentative lick this page of cream parchment, fine as linen, to taste ambrosia and with the tongue tip out the tang from the cleft of your surprise? Entice your curiosity by a pipe upon the air, a pan for you exclusively. Have you rejoiced that rocks attend, that trees do weep, and birds remain transfixed in listening? Above all, I would have you feel my arm about your shoulder, so we might both like lovers walk towards our certain future, where only our companionship draws a synchronous unwinding, travelling, not hopefully, because we have arrived, to wander in the bramble growth through the medlar garden, where all is lit from inside light, and apples not forbidden. Yet I am denied you, for you do not know me yet. I could only beckon through your mind, but hope to find affection. Reason I perforce dismissed. Now we are alone. I must speak across a synapse of a single brain. It limits all my utterances, shrinks my palate limitless to words it is accustomed to, images that are derived from lives it has retained. Seduce across these narrow bands the one whose bands I cannot know, since I have not heard you speak, not in this temple anyway. You may prefer a richer frangipani scent. Ambrosia, not your food of choice? Rather like a creme brulee. Very nice, but every day? I can leave it yet unnamed and offer rows of dots. This mind is attentive through the ear. The cradle rocks and swings. The dialects of disciplines left concepts gathered on the wing to serve the pipe through which to sing an intriguing narrative that echoes in the after air will remain translated there. So when this book is closed, some essence of its soft address will stay persuasive, comforting. All workmen are by clay confined, by timber shaped by wind or centuries of drought. I can only manufacture thought through this given mind. I would, through this interpreter, lead you only to yourself.
Just so beautiful.
Well, that's the beginning of the Canto Nine, in which Soul invites the reader to come alone to her burrow underground, which of course is the nucleus of the cell, and examine what happens there.
That is lovely. I love that it's beautiful, but it's not just beautiful. It's so there's so much information packed in the beauty.
Well, that was the problem, I have to say. Sybil tried to get the balance of, I did want it to be seductive, emotionally seductive.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's also quite a lot of information that needs to be there in order for involution to be taken as a serious alternative to evolution.
You know what I love is there's no split between consciousness and matter. I mean, that's been driven in us, through education, through our world and everything. And my cells ring. I feel my cells in my body ring that this is true, what you've spoken.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to hear you say. Wonderful, because one of the reviews put up on Amazon from somebody, I don't know who, just said, this just feels right. It just has to be this way. And I think that has been a very common reaction. This just feels right. And it goes back to what David was talking about, Aurobindo, who was talking about the ultimate relationship is with the body, the cells of the body, and what involution does, it takes it right down to the DNA in each and every cell and say, this is where soul interacts. This is where this web of interaction and the access to the oversoul, which is of course the totality, not just you. Which is why you get this religious feeling and why the body rings and why music speaks to it. And so we're entering a whole new wonderful world, really.
Lovely.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up, could you share with our listeners where they can find your blog and where they can find your book?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The book is available on Amazon. If you just look up Involution and Odyssey, it'll bring it up. It's available in Kindle forms, all ebook forms, as well as a printed book. My blog is called Involution-Odyssey, and there I am trying to explore some of the ideas in the book. I have started by blogging by telling stories, some of the stories that lie behind the book and the life that I call it the book that wrote the life, because my entire life has been written by this book. so it is the book speaking rather than the author. So I'd be very happy for you to drop in at any time. And I am actually making the first canto available to anybody who'd like to sign up to follow the blog, which would be wonderful to have some readers to interact with, because this is all very new to me. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being such a very sympathetic audience. It was lovely.
You've been just an absolute pleasure and a discovery. That's how you feel. You feel like a discovery. So thank you so much for your sharing your work and yourself with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I feel I know you all quite well already, which is one of the wonderful things about the net.
Yes.
This whole conversation has felt just right. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, David.
Just exactly in harmony, and it's absolutely beautiful. I bow to you, Philippa. Thank you.